Jett originally found his calling under the creaking rafters of old cottages and the sigh of salvaged wood. He was born in a small town in West Virginia and spent his childhood peeling bark off hickory logs next to his grandfather's barn. By the time he was 10, he had mastered basic carpentry and was struggling with old tools that whispered history. Johnny wanted the smell of sawdust and the excitement of finding old timbers from mountain homesteads that had been abandoned after the coal bust, while other boys his age begged for video games. During the summers of his teenage years, he would wander through ancient logging camps with a notepad in hand, drawing blueprints for repairing cabins that had fallen down and measuring the sizes of the planks. He was determined to keep and tell the stories that every splinter and every aged board told him. Johnny went to a tiny college in Virginia to study architecture after high school, but he dropped out when he learned that his true interest was not in plans and theory, but in the hands-on world of salvage. He worked as an apprentice for local artisans who taught him how to tell the difference between heart pine and poplar by weight and grain, how to find hidden nails with his fingers, and how to use measured steam to straighten warped floors. Property owners who wished to save historic barns from being torn down instead of being thrown away in landfills began to trust him more and more. In 2015, a producer looking for restoration talent for a new DIY network show asked Johnny to join Barnwood Builders. This endeavor would make him a household celebrity. Johnny's calm earnestness on TV was very different from the loud enthusiasm of his co-host, Bowe. Mark made fun of Johnny and ridiculed him, but Johnny paid attention to the joints and nails, often zooming in on his precise tenon cuts or the pleasant click of reclaimed flooring slotting into place. People liked his work and how humble he was, and he became known as the Wood Whisperer of the series. He helped take down log cabins season after season, carefully recording each piece of wood before bringing it to his workshop. His changes showed how old wood, once scrubbed clean of paint and decay, had pin knots and sap streaks that gave each beam its own personality. Fans learned to tell the difference between shiplap profiles and the slight curves of hand-hewn timbers that only Johnny could find. Then, in the winter of 2018, rumors started to spread. An old classmate posted on social media about Johnny leaving Barnwood Builders but didn't say why. People logged in every week to look for his familiar figure in his distinctive knit caps and tool belt, but instead they found a guest carpenter in his place. There was no official word on why the series' most detail-oriented craftsman had stepped back. People on online forums made wild guesses. Was it creative burnout? Did you have a fight with the producers over on-camera edits? Or maybe something more personal, like a family situation that made him go back to West Virginia? A distinct story quietly played out behind the scenes. There were reports of rising conflicts regarding Johnny's influence in design decisions. Producers, who wanted to make the show more streamlined, sometimes moved away from Johnny's laborious restoration process in favor of shorter reveal scenes. He didn't enjoy cutting out complicated phases, like the month-long drying of milled posts or the exact alignment of dovetail joints. He said that viewers deserved to see the whole process of how each piece of wood changed. Insiders said that family-run production fights reached a breaking point when a vital episode on fixing up a 200-year-old farmhouse aired without important milling segments. It is said that Johnny confronted the executive producers and demanded creative autonomy. They told him that reality TV needed certain compromises. But the whole story went beyond fights on set. At the same time, Johnny's wife was having a major health problem that required him to be at home. It was tough to balance extended location shooting with hospital stays. At first, producers gave him a brief break and promised that he would come back for a cameo once things settled down. But as the months went on, the season's main story switched to other cast members. Johnny was also called back to his hometown to teach advanced timber framing classes at a local community college. This would let him train apprentices the way he learned from his own mentors. It seemed like the only solution was to go back to hands-on learning, away from the TV, where he could manage family and work without deadlines pushing him to finish every cut. Johnny's leaving wasn't a disappearing act, but an evolution, even though many were sad about it. He started his own web channel, where he shared in-depth tutorials on picking out wood, fixing barn doors, and building eco-friendly post and beam barns. His membership base grew because he was ready to go into more detail about woodworking than most network TV shows did. He also worked on restoring old buildings for businesses, like turning old grist mills into community centers and turning ancient schoolhouses into event spaces. He did all of this while still talking to former Barnwood co-workers over video calls. Even while he never said anything bad about Barnwood Builders in public, people who worked there claim he left with respect for the team and thanks for the platform that brought rustic reclamation to millions of people. So what really happened to Johnny Jett? He gave up the restrictions of episodic TV for the flexibility to educate, try new things, and focus on what first sparked his interest: the satisfying sound of old barn planks scraping together, the precise drawing of mortises, and the thrill of passing on hard-earned skills to the next generation. He is still in charge of heritage timbers, but now his audience learns from him at their own pace, one detailed tutorial, one reclaimed beam, and one patient joint at a time. After leaving the network cameras behind, Johnny's workshop became a creative laboratory where he could explore every idea without having to worry about how long each episode would last. He bought an old grain silo near his birthplace and turned its round shape into a woodworking studio that is 2,500 square feet. He put together a collection of old machines inside those corrugated steel walls. These included a repaired power saw from the 1940s, a jointer he had preserved from a closed mill, and a handmade dual-head planer made by a local craftsman. He named it the Silo Lab and asked local apprentices to come and learn from him. People immediately learned that this wasn't a TV show, it was a real mentorship program based on the same values that Johnny's grandfather had taught him. His digital channel, Timber Revival, became the bridge between Barnwood Builders fans and his deep dive teaching method. Every week, Johnny posted episodes that showed the whole restoration process, from taking off layers of lead paint to micro-milling tongue and groove boards from recycled wood. There was no cutting for TV drama, and subscribers loved the slow pace and honest narration. They watched every planing pass and every chisel scratch, and they learned that patience, not show, is what makes good craftsmanship last. One comment said, "I never thought I'd watch an hour on mortise and tenon joinery, but Johnny makes it riveting." This unexpected sentiment showed how much people wanted realness, proof that fans wanted substance over flashy edits. In addition to lectures, he held community workshops on how to protect historical sites. Johnny led teams of volunteers to carefully take apart a 150-year-old tobacco barn that was going to be torn down at an annual barn rescue event. People came from nearby states to dig through piles of old nails and twisted boards, writing down what they did in their own journals. He taught them how to number timbers, make splice sleeves for broken posts, and store supplies correctly when it's humid. When the barn's framework eventually went up in a reclaimed pine pavilion at the local farmers market, the people who helped build it took home more than just wood. They took home a lesson on how to take care of things. At the same time, Johnny was in charge of the non-profit Barnwood Heritage Trust, which he had quietly started the year after he left TV. The trust's goal is to save barns that are in risk of falling down by giving out funds and getting people to work for free. It worked with universities, historical groups, and land trusts. Under his direction, many endangered buildings were turned into community centers, art spaces, or places of learning. For example, the trust turned a log cottage that used to belong to a pioneering female doctor into a museum about rural health. Local newspapers put headlines about Johnny's work on the front page, calling him Appalachia's timber guardian. Even though the TV spotlight had dimmed, his influence in the region was stronger than ever. Of course, leaving Barnwood Builders meant taking some financial risks. Television contracts earned 6 figures per season, while self-funded organizations did not. Johnny had to make some tough decisions. Should he grow the trust or preserve his free apprentice program? Put money into studio gear or use it to reach out to rural communities? He chose a simpler life over fame instead of stardom. He sold power tools he didn't use very often, moved from a suburban home to a reconstructed cabin on reclaimed oak pilings, and promised to earn every inch of workspace. His supporters liked how he lived by his convictions and was a craftsman who wasn't scared to do what he believed in. His open talks about managing cash flow and budgeting for projects made for an unexpected but successful series on his channel. This shows that being open about money can build trust. Then, in late 2019, something strange happened. A note from the producer of Barnwood Builders showed up in his inbox. They had made a special anniversary episode and wanted Johnny to come back as a guest to compare how he restored things in the show's early seasons with how he does it now. The invitation came with creative banners that said he could direct, co-produce, and write his own parts. The news made social media go crazy. "Bring back Johnny," fans yelled. Showdown, studio versus Silo Lab. Yet, Johnny's answer shocked many. He said no. He liked the offer but said that his art needed consistency, not nostalgia. It felt like going back to the old way of doing things when you traded one kind of show-driven compromise for another. Instead, he told them to send a camera crew to film his silo lab work and then make an independent special that showed all sides of the story, connecting TV and his own world. Johnny's counteroffer showed that he was willing to work with others without giving up his new way of restoring things. PBS picked up his idea in early 2021. The documentary Barnwood Builders, Roots and Rebellion put the network series' quick 10-minute time-lapse next to a whole day at his silo lab. It showed how long study and careful effort may discover latent structural strength in recycled timbers. Viewers witnessed the finest of contrast framing, marketed entertainment versus unplanned investigation. The response was huge. Long-standing admirers wrote messages. The PBS show Barnwood Builders, Roots and Rebellion got a lot of praise, with viewers noting how different the polished highlights were from the raw rhythms of Johnny's silo lab. Many letters came to his studio congratulating him for finally revealing the hard effort that went into each salvaged beam. Historians praised the documentary for including important restoration information that is typically lost in quick edits. Fans who first saw Johnny on network television were happy to see him back in a format that appreciated his dedication to honesty and depth. Timber Revival subscriptions shot up within days of the show's first airing. People who had been fans for a long time and people who had just become fans all rushed to see long clips from the silo lab. Johnny's commentary on finding wood and testing for moisture gave uncommon insights into the details of building with wood. Brands that make eco-friendly building materials wanted to work with him because of his systematic approach and passionate fan base. He said no to most offers that seemed too businesslike, but he did agree to help with a limited edition set of hand tools made by a Pennsylvania vintage toolmaker. Soon, they had invitations to speak at woodworking festivals and preservation symposiums all over North America. Johnny gave keynote speeches that mixed personal stories with technical demonstrations. He showed why timber framing is as much about listening to the wood's history as it is about structural principles. His appearances changed the focus of these events from nostalgia to real skill building, motivating people to reconsider how they save things in their own communities. Organizers said that people had to wait months to get into his workshops, which shows that he was more than just a TV face. Under Johnny's direction, the Barnwood Heritage Trust grew at the same time. He set up regional branches in states from Kentucky to Maine, where he hired volunteers and specialists to look at buildings that were in risk of falling down. One interesting project was fixing up a tobacco drying barn from the Civil War in rural Virginia. The trust helped the apprentices carefully replace damaged rafters with beams made on site from rescued oak trees. They then wrote down how they did it in instructional booklets that were sent to local schools. People in the community often thank Johnny for keeping a real piece of their shared history alive for future generations. Johnny relied on his family for support more than ever at home. Jenny, his wife, and their 2 sons started going to the silo lab on weekends to help sort through reused nails and prepare small samples for mill tests. Seeing kids joyfully wearing little tool belts made his aim even more clear: it was for people of all ages. In the past, network shooting dates had made his personal life difficult, but the new timetable made it easier to plan family dinners around the farmhouse table he constructed by hand. He often stayed up late recording voiceovers for his digital series and writing down plans for a book he was working on that he was going to call Reclaimed Wisdom, A Guide to Timber Heritage. The text has stories about barns that changed rural communities throughout hundreds of years, along with step-by-step pictures of how to do things. Specialized presses wanted to publish his work because of how well he told stories and how well he crafted them. Johnny wants the book to be a go-to source for both novices and professionals who want to make sure that the talents he shows off online are still available in print. Johnny's mindset still puts a lot of emphasis on protecting the environment. He often publishes and talks about how timber reclamation lowers carbon footprints by making current materials last longer instead of cutting down new trees. He writes for green building magazines about the long-term benefits of adaptive reuse compared to new construction. He weighs the energy expenses of tearing down existing buildings against the energy stored in beams that are hundreds of years old. His fair, data-driven arguments have influenced policy talks in many municipal planning commissions. Johnny wants to turn an old textile mill in his village into a public timber arts museum and training facility in the future. He is in talks to get money and historic landmark protection for the location. The planned museum will have salvaged buildings on display, rotating tool exhibitions, and seminars for kids and adults that they may participate in. The digital archive will go along with the actual building. It will have video tutorials, oral histories, and 3D scans of old joinery techniques that people all around the world may see. In the end, Jett's story is about how he went from being a craftsman on TV to being in charge of protecting timber history. He has made sure that the principles and practices behind salvaged wood will last long after any broadcast season by using independent platforms, educating directly at his own speed, and forming organizations that increase his efforts. Johnny's genuine legacy is a living network of learners who are keeping the craft of timber restoration alive. These include apprentices, historians, and do-it-yourselfers who follow his standards of patience, precision, and deep regard for the material world. His continuous journey shows how one craftsman's enthusiasm can start a movement of attentive restoration. After the PBS broadcast underlined Johnny's commitment to depth above drama, he soon found mainstream venues looking for him, not just in woodshops. Discovery Channel asked him to host a short series called Beyond the Barn, in which he would travel the world to save old buildings, such Swedish timber barns and Japanese kura storehouses. The offer came with a budget in the six figures, full creative control, and a credit as a producer. But when filming started in early 2022, Johnny had to deal with the same problems he always did. His urge to slow down for careful restoration sometimes conflicted with the production timelines that called for big disclosures. He wouldn't skip the week-long kiln drying procedure that made sure the recycled beams wouldn't bend in a humid climate while filming in rural Sweden. Executives said they would delete the part, but staff members stood by him and said that honesty was the only thing that made the show worth watching. At that point, Johnny understood that his impact went far beyond his personal work. He was changing the fundamental nature of restoration television around the world. At home, this new fame carried with it new duties. After the first season of Beyond the Barn got good reviews, he had invites from historic preservation groups all around North America and Europe. He spoke in front of congressional committees about the need for stronger incentives to protect rural cultural buildings. He said that subsidies and tax credits should promote adaptive reuse over demolition. In his presentations, he often talked about specific examples from his work with nonprofits that showed how each barn or mill conserved cultural memory and helped the economy in a sustainable way. He once stood in a court chamber in Washington, D.C., carrying a piece of hand-hewn heart pine that he had taken from a destroyed tobacco barn. He talked about how each splinter held decades of community stories that would be lost without policy protections. Many lawmakers who didn't know much about timber processes leaned forward, fascinated by the real object in his hand. Even though he was involved in these high-profile events, Johnny kept his focus on his profession and community. He started the Barnwood Builders Masonry and Timber Conference at his silo lab, which brought together masons, timber framers, historians, and architects for a multi-day event. One year, the theme was about building earth-fast logs in pioneer settlements, and the next year, it was about the little things that make barn-raising ceremonies bring people together. Participants went on a tour of his workshop, listened to lectures on how to test for moisture content, and worked together in hands-on workshops. The conference developed from a small meeting of 50 people to an international event that drew hundreds of people. Toolmakers and historical organizations that shared Johnny's beliefs helped pay for it. People who went to the event talked a lot on social media about how Johnny's friendly teaching style and support for preservation policies gave them the tools they needed to start their own projects back home. Of course, not every step forward went smoothly. When a big museum asked him to put together an exhibit of reclaimed wood, he learned that curatorial teams wanted to show off perfect cross-sections instead than rough, weathered beams. He disagreed, saying that the age spots, nail holes, lichen stains, and uneven grain were all important parts of the story of each piece. The fight got worse and worse until it reached the museum's boardroom, where Johnny gave a passionate speech on how important it is to respect history's marks instead of cleaning them up to make them look better. He said he would pull out completely if the exhibit design didn't have real authenticity. The museum finally gave in and made a mixed media installation that combined polished cross-sections with intact antique timbers and recordings of oral histories. The show became a museum bestseller and a lesson on how to keep the curator's vision while also being true to history. Johnny also had to deal with how digital content was changing at the same time. Timber Revival now had to compete with influencers who offered quick-fix salvage hacks and paid one-hour barn rebuilds that didn't cover important checks for moisture and structure. Instead of starting a fight, Johnny worked even harder to work with others. He invited other artisans and academics on his show to talk about the problems with the rapid build mentality and stress the science behind long-term preservation. He made short videos that compared real timber repair to sped-up barn flip experiments, focusing on stories of buildings that fell down because builders skipped important processes. These episodes went viral, which led to discussions in the industry on what ethical standards should be used for broadcast restoration content. Johnny put himself in the middle of fans who wanted speed and experts who cared about substance by talking to them instead of fighting with them. Johnny's journey came to an end at the end of 2023. He stood in front of a crowd during the opening of the Timber Arts Museum and Training Center, which is a renovated textile mill that he helped turn into an interactive cultural site. The museum's high atrium had beams hanging from the ceiling that had been recovered from a grist mill in the Appalachian Mountains. Downstairs, apprentices were carving dovetail joints in workshops under tall factory windows. He saw students, volunteers, lawmakers, and co-workers with happy expressions and realized that his journey from Barnwood Builders carpenter to global custodian of timber traditions was built on a strong set of values. He told everyone that every endeavor, whether it was on network TV or in a rural community hall, needs patience, respect, and a constant interest in the stories that wood tells. More than any celebrity or ratings, that message described what really happened to Johnny Jett. He became a custodian of barns, workmanship, history, and the legacy that lives on wherever salvaged wood is used again. Johnny's influence went beyond the silo lab and into education, charity, and policy. He turned a one-man workshop into a movement for thoughtful restoration. He worked with the forestry department at Marshall University to build a semester-long curriculum in timber conservation studies after starting the Timber Arts Museum. Students went to Johnny's studio for labs and then came back to campus to look at how adaptive reuse affects the environment compared to new harvesting. There were lessons in the program on checking for moisture, analyzing old paint, and procuring materials in an ethical way. Every summer, 20 college students made a list of endangered barns in rural West Virginia. This work added to the National Barnwood Database, which is an open-access repository that has images, floor plans, and condition reports for thousands of structures. Over the course of 6 months, volunteer contributors sent in more than 1,000 entries that helped guide preservation efforts across the country. Along with working with schools, Johnny started fireside chats, which were live-streamed every week. Every Thursday night, he lit a wood stove in the silo lab and answered questions from viewers in real time. The subjects covered were as varied as the chemistry of tannins in oak trees that are hundreds of years old and the morality of selling recycled pine at craft furniture marketplaces. There were guest specialists like architectural historians, chemists who tested lead paint flakes, and other woodworkers who showed how to do Japanese joinery. These uncensored chats drew hundreds of people and proved his point that free dialogue leads to good management. He set up a moderated Q&A system that put constructive involvement ahead of trolling. This methodology is currently being evaluated by digital community managers who work with young people. The Wood Heritage Fellowship, a competitive grant that gives seed money to citizen scientists and craftspeople under 40, helped Johnny's altruistic idea come to life. Fellows saved everything from a Quaker meeting house in Ohio to a weaving facility in Kentucky where people worked together to make new pattern boards. Each resident spent a month at the Silo Lab, where they worked on a project that was shown to the public at the end. The fellowship let him meet more people in his field and in other fields of restoration, giving a voice to people who had been disregarded before. People who got it termed it a career-defining chance that helped them go from being amateurs to heritage professionals. Of course, detractors came along with growth. Purist conservators accused Johnny of over-enthusiastic interventions for applying new epoxies to strengthen fractured beams in late 2022. An expert at a national preservation conference questioned his methodology, which led to a published dispute in a peer-reviewed publication. Johnny's answer was to put together a technical committee to test different adhesives and write open-source white papers about how well they worked over time. These strict side-by-side tests brought together traditional crafts and modern material science, helping both charitable projects and academic research. On the local front, Pendleton County tourism skyrocketed when his international series brought in weekend visitors who wanted to see the Silo Lab. Some local craftspeople were apprehensive that commercialization may weaken regional customs, even while companies were happy about sold-out heirlooms and bigger menus. To fix this, Johnny started the Pendleton Artisan Guild, which gives free professional development and marketing help to blacksmiths and woodworkers in the area. Quarterly meetings in a restored history hall made sure that the community as a whole got economic benefits, not just his own businesses. As 2023 came to an end, Johnny quietly set goals for 2024. These included the official opening of the Timber Arts Museum, the release of his field guide Reclaimed Wisdom, the Wood Heritage Fellowship's expansion into Latin America, and the second season of Beyond the Barn in New Zealand. Still, his essential values stay the same: patiently celebrating tangible heritage, taking care of the next generation, and appreciating the stories that wood carries. He often states, restoration isn't about getting the fastest reveal, it's about honoring the slow dance between human hands and wood's ancient rhythms. By the beginning of 2024, Johnny's work had earned him the Lifetime Craftsman Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This award is generally only given to academics. He thanked his apprentices for being curious and for the silent stories that were stored away in each retrieved beam in his victory speech. He told the audience that true preservation thrives when curiosity leads hands that honor wood's layered past. As spring spread across Appalachia, Johnny went back to the roots of his calling, spending dawn hours in woodland clearings where he measured fallen beams against growth rings that were hundreds of years old. His sense of purpose had changed from watching highlights on TV to taking care of the region's material heritage as a whole. Each beam he retrieved was a tribute to the region's strength and a reminder that every building has its own story. This broader perspective led the last part of his journey, which was about more than just recognition. It was about the lasting effects of meticulous, well-informed craftsmanship. In real life, he made the Silo Labs Fellowship bigger by adding an annual residency for preservation journalists. This made sure that the stories of saved barns reached people outside of craft circles and policy forums. Within months of its debut, his field guide, Reclaimed Wisdom, went into a second printing. People enjoyed it not only for its comprehensive graphics but also for its first-person thoughts on how tools and wood work together. Universities all around North America used its case studies in graduate lectures on rural economics, cultural geography, and sustainability. Licensing agreements let digital copies of his hand-drawn joinery blueprints be used in interactive museum exhibits from Nova Scotia to New Zealand, which shows how far his work has spread throughout the world. As students worked with 3D models of dovetailed corner posts, they learned by doing, just like Johnny had shown them in his slowest seminars. At the same time, the Barnwood Heritage Trust, a non-profit organization, celebrated its 10th anniversary by organizing a worldwide conference in Copenhagen and inviting participants from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Johnny's keynote speech, which was broadcast live from the Silo Lab, included stories from his own life about the West Virginia barns that impacted his career and pleas for people from other countries to work together to find the best ways to reuse lumber. He talked about TimberShare, a new digital platform that would let people throughout the world report on the condition of endangered buildings. Within weeks, architects in Japan entered data on Kura warehouses, while historical groups in Sweden shared designs of stave churches. This created a dynamic online atlas of aging wood architecture, a living legacy of his faith in community-driven preservation. In Pendleton County, Johnny oversaw the last touches on the Timber Arts Museum's interactive wing, where visitors could observe how ancient barns were restored step by step using augmented reality goggles. He talked to his apprentices about the initial skeleton of his grain silo studio and how that simple change had turned into an international center for careful repair. As volunteers put up the last plaque to recognize local crafters whose names rarely made the news, Johnny realized that the museum was more than just a place to store things, it was a beacon, calling people and scholars to join the patient, careful art of timber regeneration. On a personal level, he found a rhythm of calm happiness. He built a refurbished millworker's cottage for his sons and had family workshops there on the weekends. He shared the ideas that had governed his work with the sound of wood fires and the click of folding rulers: inquiry before efficiency, respect before spectacle, and patience before promise. Every lesson brought back memories of the hundreds of carpenters he had taught in the Silo Lab and the lessons his grandfather had taught him in the barn. He realized that stewardship wasn't just about protecting buildings when he saw young hands tracing the grain on old boards. It was also about raising the next generation of caretakers. Johnny plans to write down his experiences in an oral history series that will include the stories of longtime apprentices and community elders as well as his own. He sees a decentralized network of microlabs, small studios based on the Silo Lab, where craftspeople can learn in their own backyards instead of having to go to him. These local hubs will help economies grow and people become more aware of other cultures. They will show that the love for recycled wood doesn't have to be limited to faraway valleys. In the end, what started as a small skill on a DIY program turned into a worldwide movement. One craftsman's patience showed us that true preservation doesn't happen in the news but in the constant effort of hearts and hands working together toward a common goal.